This is another episode of Closed. Lee Bergstein here with a very exciting episode on a nor'easter Thursday here in New York. Although it's not raining, it's supposed to be a nor'easter. I think that was a false promise that many of us relied on. But anyway, we're super happy to have Holly Pretsky with us. Holly is the city editor for City and State New York, journalist and editor, where she leads coverage on the city's political landscape from housing to mayoral campaigns. She's also reported for outlets like NPR and the Vineyard Gazette, and she's here to talk about the impending mayor's race. But first, Holly, thanks so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
So I mentioned before we started that we just actually did another interview about the mayoral race a few weeks ago. And I think it might be helpful for our listeners, sitting here today, May 22nd, what's the current state of play of the race in New York? Obviously, things change every day, whether it's DOJ getting involved or Mayor Adams tweeting curse words about the city of Boston. It feels like there's going to be a change, certainly between now and when this episode is broadcasted. But what's the state of play today?
Yes, things are changing quite a bit. This has been, by most accounts, a pretty unprecedented mayoral race in New York City. Our incumbent mayor, Eric Adams, is running for re-election. Typically, it would not be that eventful of a mayoral race with an incumbent mayor who's not term limited, but this mayor is different. He was federally indicted on corruption charges. The entirety almost of his inner circle resigned. They were also raided by federal agents. And then Trump won the election and the Department of Justice dropped these charges. So that caused even more agitation and more calls for the mayor to step down because there was a perception that he had done a deal with the Republican president, and he's since gone and visited Trump and seems to be quite cozy with Trump despite being a Democrat, although he used to be a Republican. So he actually dropped out of the Democratic primary, which in recent history, that's where we choose our mayors in New York City because it's such a Democratic city. So he's dropped out of the Democratic primary and he's going to run in the general election as an independent. So that has really shaken up the race, leaving the primary to a few frontrunners. We have the former governor of New York, Andrew Cuomo, who jumped into the race in March. He's far and away the front runner. He's 20 points ahead of the next closest candidate. So we'll see what happens. Of course, things can change and they have been changing so rapidly every couple weeks in this race. But as of right now, Andrew Cuomo is looking like the heavy favorite to win the Democratic primary. Second behind him is Assembly member Zohran Mamdani, who's a super far left, very charismatic, very talented young Assembly member. I think he's in his third term. And he's 33 years old, and he's really energized young people and the left. And he's hoping to expand his coalition to also include working class voters, Muslim voters, and maybe even some Eric Adams voters. So far, he has not been able to actually do that, but that's his hope. So right now, Cuomo's in the 40s in polling and Zohran's in the 20s. And then behind them, you have our comptroller, Brad Lander, super wonky guy, very popular in Brownstone, Brooklyn, used to be in the city council, also pretty progressive, but not so far left as Zohran. And we have our city council speaker, Adrienne Adams, who jumped in even after Andrew Cuomo. She jumped in at the very last minute. She was recruited, reportedly, to help stop Andrew Cuomo. And she's also a dedicated and talented public servant. It'll be interesting to see if she can take off in the last month of the race. So far, she hasn't been able to, but she entered late, so maybe she'll catch up.
Yeah, I can't wait to see the Eric Adams FX miniseries. That's definitely coming.
And maybe he'll star.
He probably will want to star. We're here to talk about, to the extent that we want to, the potential real estate initiatives or policies of the various candidates. But as someone who kind of inhales political podcasts daily, I can't help but pull on the thread that you talked about just now, which is that the Democratic primary is a good indicator of who's going to win the mayoral race. I'm not sure that's quite so true anymore.
No, definitely not this year.
Mayor Bloomberg ran as everything, right? I think he started as a Republican, Giuliani years, and then I think he switched to independent. And then his policies were liberal and democratic-ish policies, but really not to the level of a Zoran or even a Lander. So is there a runway for whether it's Adams running on the Republican ticket? I don't know if that's feasible. I don't know if there are logistical issues with that, or some other candidate. If Cuomo wins Democratic primary, which by all indications right now, barring his indictment by DOJ, which is not out of the question, although maybe that'll help depending on the political landscape. Is there a potential Republican candidate out there who could challenge for the
The general. Yeah, it's a really good point. As of right now, I think we just found out one day ago that there's an official Department of Justice probe into Cuomo, alleging that he lied when he was testifying before Congress about how he handled COVID in nursing homes. So that was a big development that broke just before, a couple of days before we recorded this, and it's possible that that could develop further and further impact the race. But as far as non-Democrats having a chance, definitely this year it seems like the year for that. A lot of the energy, which has for the past two mayors been in the primary, has moved to the general because our incumbent mayor, Eric Adams, who's not polling well, he's really struggling at this point, but he has a lot of time before the general. So he's running as an independent candidate. He's not running as a Republican. If he wanted to run as a Republican, he would have already had to petition to get on to primary Curtis Sliwa, who is running as a Republican and has previously. But he's going to run on these two ballot lines that he invented. I think one's called Stop Anti-Semitism, but he's going to appear on the ballot as himself on these bespoke ballot lines in November. We'll have the Democratic primary winner, who right now, of course, this could change, but right now it's looking like that's going to be Andrew Cuomo if things continue the way that they're going now. And then the Working Families Party, which is this it's a lefty, newer party that exists in New York State and also has a slot on the November ballot and has the ability to put someone. They have a placeholder candidate there now, but they have the ability to put someone else on that ballot line. Working Families Party and Andrew Cuomo hate each other. They're very adversarial toward each other. Usually the Working Families Party would back whoever wins the Democratic primary. But this year, they've already said publicly that they will not back Andrew Cuomo. So that opens up this possibility that maybe whoever gets second place in the Democratic primary, whether that's Assemblyman Zoran Mondani or the Comptroller Brad Lander or the Speaker Adrian Adams, that the WFP would put them on the ballot. So now we have three major candidates on the ballot in November, which is super unusual. Eric Adams, potentially Andrew Cuomo, potentially a WFP candidate. Then we have Curtis Sliwa, who is not taken super seriously in New York City, but is really well known.
He wears a red hat, right?
Yes. He founded this vigilante crime fighting group. And he's this kind of classic New York character who has run before. He ran against Eric Adams last time around, lost by a lot. But now, with this combination of candidates, all of a sudden it's like, okay, maybe Curtis Sliwa does have a path, which is kind of crazy because you're dividing the vote. It's not a ranked choice election, so people just vote for one candidate. And then you also have another independent candidate, Jim Walden, who's a pretty well-respected attorney who has actually fundraised quite a bit. So he'll be on the ballot as well. So you have a 5-way race in November. That's really hard to predict what could possibly happen there. But as you noted, the primary is nothing but a precursor this year, where usually that is where we choose our mayor. This year, it's going to be a very interesting general election in November.
And I'm sure a lot will happen between now and then. I think at some point in the past, Anthony Weiner was the mayor of New York City, and that changed a lot of things.
And he's running for city council, by the way. Did you know he's doing another comeback attempt?
No one ever, when it comes to politics, no one ever really dies.
It's true. I mean, that's the thing that Andrew Cuomo and Donald Trump and Anthony Weiner all have in common, this sense of having previously been wronged and, not being willing to give up and coming back and running again. And I guess, at least in Trump's case, and it seems like in Cuomo's case, the voters do respond to that and they do want to support this comeback.
Yeah, I think also like those types of narratives take hold on social media where they can be crafted in like a variety of different ways. And they're more compelling than like, oh, what's your policy on congestion pricing, or we're going to get to development. Like the comeback story is appealing to so many people out there who see themselves in some way in having been wrong and coming back and achieving success. So I think, yeah, it makes a candidate like that more viable than before Twitter or X and Instagram and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think the social media aspect is sort of separate. I think of all the candidates, Donnie, the lefty young guy, is like the one who's really using social media to his benefit, really masterfully, like getting a lot of support there. Well, it's not so much of like a social media guy, but you're right. He has 100% name recognition. Everyone remembers him. And I guess a lot of people remember him positively. Like it's been enough years and the kind of, we're looking back with rose-colored glasses, most of the electorate, it seems like, and people seem to have really appreciated his leadership, even though there were so many scandals and so much baggage with sexual harassment allegations, but also the nursing home issue that the Department of Justice is now looking into. But then he also had some corruption stuff. He had a book deal that was shady, and he tried to obstruct the Moreland Commission, which was like a government accountability agency, too, earlier in his governorship. So,
well, like I said, we could probably talk about like the high level stuff for a very long time, but let's
yeah.
spend a few minutes on real estate before I have to let you go. When I think New York City mayoral candidate, I think real estate, you can't help but think of Adams because of City of Yes, which relative to prior administration attempts to develop New York City has to be kind of objectively viewed as at least a above average success. Whether or not it's actually going to execute the way that it envisions executing is still up for discussion. But what are some of the other candidates? What are they like when it comes to real estate development or building homes, increasing the housing supply or affordable homes? What if you had to pick like one or two sentences about each of them, how would you classify them?
So all the candidates running for mayor agree that we need more housing in New York City and that there's an urgent need to develop more housing. So they're all starting from the same point there. Where the attitudes among the candidates have really shifted since the last mayoral election is this willingness to take money from real estate. There was this pledge in 2021 and kind of around that time to not accept donations from real estate. Like real estate had this really kind of negative connotation, especially for candidates who are running further to the left. And there was this trend of promising not to take any donations to show that you weren't being influenced by real estate interests. That is completely gone, really. I mean, Mamdani and Lander have both sort of said that they're not taking real estate donations, but a candidate who ran last time, Scott Stringer, who took the pledge last time, is now accepting donations. Another progressive in the race who we haven't mentioned yet because he hasn't done super well in the polls yet. He hasn't gotten a ton of attention, but is Zelnor Myrie. He used to promise not to take money from real estate, and now he's branding himself as the YIMBY candidate. So there's this sense of like, I think the vibe has shifted. It used to be like anti-real estate is bad, real estate's influence in politics is toxic. And now we're in this world of like abundance, YIMBY, an affordability crisis. It has to be a private and public partnership solution to make the city more affordable. So in general, that's kind of like the environment that we're operating in now. Andrew Cuomo, the frontrunner's plan is not so different from the incumbent mayor, Eric Adams. This is true of a lot of Andrew Cuomo's policies. He's kind of running from a policy perspective as sort of a continuation of what Eric Adams' policies are, this kind of like moderate, pragmatic position. So he's, like Adams, calling for building and preserving 500,000 units of housing over 10 years. Eric Adams, obviously running as an independent now, but is running on City of Yes, as you mentioned, which was a big accomplishment to rezone many areas of the city, take away parking mandates, allow for more density, to hopefully create 80,000 homes over the next 15 years. But that's part of his 500,000 homes in the next 10 years goal, moonshot goal. Zohran Mamdani, the far left candidate, wants to double down on constructing new homes with public funds. So he wants the city to build 200,000 new affordable homes over 10 years for low income households and seniors. He would also support upzonings and eliminate some requirements for that new housing like comes with parking spaces, for example, but it seems that the main focus is city-built, deeply affordable housing for vulnerable populations.
And correct me if I'm wrong. I think Adams, and I'm guessing Cuomo to a similar extent. Of course, politically you have to be in favor of affordable housing in New York City, but they're advocating a more mixed approach, right? Where the housing stock has certainly a substantial affordable component, but also a lot of infusing the marketplace with as much private money as possible, right? It's a combination.
Yeah, especially compared to Mamdani's proposal. Adrienne Adams the Speaker of the City Council, has not released a housing plan yet, but she was really involved with City of Yes, which was the Adams administration's policy, but had to be passed by the City Council, which she leads. She touts that as a big accomplishment that she got that through the council, and she takes a lot of credit for that, which is fair. The council did water City of Yes down quite a bit.
Right.
For example, I think the original proposal would have eliminated parking mandates throughout the whole city, but then the council kind of carved out a few different areas, or a lot of different areas actually. From that aspect, there's a lot of members who are from like low density areas far from public transit who had a lot of concerns about upzoning their neighborhoods. So there was some NIMBYism that ended up getting into City of Yes, but still it's a big accomplishment that she's touting. Brad Lander, the comptroller, wants to declare a state of emergency on the housing crisis, which would hopefully help expedite new development. And he also wants to identify new areas to build homes, including golf courses. Zelnor Myrie, I don't think he's really broken through to the typical voters. He's on TV, he has public matching funds, so we'll see if he can catch on in the polls at all, but he really has from the jump branded himself as a YIMBY candidate. And he was the first candidate to release his housing plan. He wants to build or preserve 1 million units of housing. He wants to do a really big upzoning in Midtown. He calls it the mega Midtown upzoning. So he's really made this a central part of his campaign, and he did it much earlier than anyone else. So I just want to give him a shout out, even though he's not discussed very often at this point in that like crop of leading candidates.
Yeah. So, it's actually a good segue because it sounds like between his acceptance of real estate money and some of his policies, he would be, if he was more viable, the candidate to champion for the real estate industry, but he's doing poorly. So I guess the question, and Adams also doing somewhat poorly, even though real estate was a central focus of his administration. So it begs the question, do people care? Do voters care about everybody wants more housing, and I think that it's maybe the most critical issue in our entire country, the lack of housing stock or the lack of affordable housing stock. But is it resonating with voters? Because at the end of the day, that's kind of what really matters from a candidate perspective. Once you're in office, it's different. And I do think that people sometimes their priorities shift with respect to candidate versus their elected official and what they expect of them. But you get the sense that this is an issue that's even significant.
Voters really care about what their rent costs and what it feels like to search for an apartment in New York City, which it feels terrible to try to do that. That does not necessarily translate to voters supporting these massive development plans because they are not instant gratification. So I think what you see with candidates who are trying to appeal to voters now in this instant way is you start seeing conversations about freezing the rent.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where the nexus of everyday person cares about this.
That's a Zohran policy, right?
He's definitely been the most vocal about that. The other candidates are funny. They get asked this all the time, and the answers have evolved a little bit. So Zohran Mamdani is committed to freezing the rent. So is Jessica Ramos, another candidate I haven't mentioned yet, because she also, hasn't been polling super high. Brad Lander and Adrian Adams have said that they think the rent should be frozen this year. They have absolutely no control over that. So, it's kind of a symbolic thing that they're saying. Zohran Mamdani, I think, wants to freeze it every year that he's mayor. By the way, mayors don't directly get to decide this. They get to appoint members to the Rent Guidelines Board, which decides.
These are rent freezes for market and regular units, or just
regulated units.
You can't freeze the market rent.
No. Yeah, just the ones that are regulated. And speaking of that, just speaking of like government regulation or government trying to influence the affordability of rent, Andrew Cuomo is now the candidate who's getting the most support from real estate. There's a PAC supporting him that's gotten big donations from Stephen Roth.
He's going to win.
Stephen Ross. What?
He's going to win. So that's why he's getting the...
Right. That's an interesting thing is like when people are donating to try and influence the race to help someone get ahead, or when people are donating because they see that there's an heir apparent and they just want to be on that person's good side. So I think that's definitely what's happening here with real estate. He got $50,000 from Stephen Ross. Don Fish, construction magnate, gave him $250,000. RFR Holdings gave him $100,000. A lot of big real estate money going toward Andrew Cuomo, which is interesting because he did pass major tenant protection, or he signed a major tenant protection law when he was governor in 2019 that a lot of people in real estate, I think, blame for the housing crisis that we're in now.
Yeah,
I think there's debate about that, obviously, but it's just interesting to see them kind of around and realize that he's the most likely to win, so might as well.
Yeah, there was the toxic mix of that legislation passing, less than a year before COVID. So I think those two things together created this mix that has crippled certain sectors of the real estate market. One thing that you raised that I think is kind of interesting, going back to what voters care about, and I agree, like New York City voters, for the most part, the vast majority of voters are renting in New York City, or the people who are engaged enough to vote are renting in New York City, irrespective of the borough. And why can't candidates just do a better job of connecting an increase in housing supply to lowering rent? That seems like a really easy message to convey. To your point, it speaks to, it's probably that and crime and transportation. Like those are the three things that people care about living in New York City. Crime's easy. There's all kinds of speaking points on crime. Everybody's saying the same thing. Rent, it feels like it should just be a very easy, direct message. We need more housing in order to lower your rent, and I'm going to do that. But I don't hear any of the candidates making that argument.
I think that well, it's hard to say because I've been paying attention to this since Eric Adams got elected. We start thinking about, okay, what's the next thing? I guess not since he got elected, since he really started struggling and it really looked like there was maybe going to be a real race to replace him, which was a couple of years ago. When
the FBI raided his offices and he got indicted.
Yeah, his phones got taken. FBI took his phones, and that was in the Times. I think the Times wrote that. I think that was November of 2023.
Yeah, 23.
So since then, it's really been like blood in the water for him. Right. But like I said, I think the freeze the rent thing is like such an easy, simple phrase, and it's so digestible, and it's like, if you're a renter, that sounds great. And the housing piece, we need to build more housing to address the housing crisis, is a little bit more, there's like a couple more steps there between building more housing and lowering your rent, like you said. But I do think that candidates are talking about it so much more than they have in previous elections. And City of Yes had to overcome some major opposition. And that was a really big win for Eric Adams and a really big win for, developers and housing people. And I think it's part of this shift of like real estate being seen as a partner less than a predator. So I do think there's been a shift, and I do think the campaigns, like all of them, are saying we want to build X 100,000 number of units. Of course, their abilities to deliver on that are going to vary, and we'll see what happens with the next mayor, how successful they are in managing that and marshaling that through. But I do think it is something that they're talking about, and more than at least in the recent past.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think this is anecdotal from reading articles, but and this is just kind of what you know about voting in general. Like, it's harder for lower income people to vote because they have to take time off from work, they have to get to the polls, they need to find childcare. So I think but I think that there's roughly like half of the city is comprised of market rate units, half of the city is comprised of regulated units. So if you're talking about freezing the rent, you're only talking to half of the city who are, again, anecdotally voting in a smaller percentage than the wealthier part of the city for reasons that are entirely understandable. So freeze to rent doesn't resonate for the people who are living in market rate units. And they're saying the landlords are increasing my rent $1,000, $2,000, $3,000, whatever it is. Is there messaging that's directed to those tenants and the landlords that are owning those buildings? Maybe not. Maybe there's not.
Yeah, I think the mayor, so Eric Adams has been very unwilling to adopt these positions, these pro-tenant positions. And I think he's been even a little like resentful of how legible those pro-tenant positions are. And he's, I think, like accused other candidates of oversimplifying this ecosystem.
I'm doing right now.
When he ran in 2021, he was like, I am real estate. Like that was a big part of his candidacy. He passed it. Yes, I am real estate. And then he even went so far as to like publicly criticize the Fair Act, which was another big piece of real estate adjacent legislation that passed this year. Councilmember Chiose's bill to get rid of the broker fee. Eric Adams, like that, and that was so popular. Everyone, anyone who wanted to appeal to voters was hopeful to somehow be associated with that bill, or just to tout it in some way. And Eric Adams was even critical of that. So he's that politician who I think of when you ask like who's talking to the landlords. I think of him definitely. I don't pay a ton of attention to Curtis Lewa because prior to now, he never seemed like he stood a chance. Now we're going to have to start paying a little closer attention to his platforms and his positions on things because he stands a way better chance than last time around to become mayor. I think that he has a real focus on small landlords in particular.
Yeah. Well, I know you're a journalist, not a prognosticator, but between now and election day, what's one thing to look out for, one prediction that might take place over the course of the next 6 months, 7 months?
Yeah, between now and election day, the debates are going to be big. It's easy for us to forget that most people don't even know that there's a primary coming up at this point. Most people haven't really thought too much about this primary. A lot of people might not even be aware that there is an election happening in New York City this year. So the debates will be, I think, a big moment. There's 2 in June for the mayor's race. And Andrew Cuomo in particular has been really hard to get a hold of for the press. And he hasn't been out and about too much. He's been bubble wrapped because he has so many scandals and so many critics. I think he's, being and he's so far ahead. He doesn't need to like get out there and introduce himself to people. So he's being very conservative on it.
Will he debate or will he take
yeah.
He's already pledged that he will debate.
I think he has to. I think he's participating in the public matching funds program, and that's required, I believe, of those candidates who are participating in that program. They have to show up at these debates. So that'll be, long story short, some of the first times that we actually see him in direct conversation with all of these other primary candidates who have been hammering him in his absence, for the past few months. Even before he got in the race, they were hammering him.
Although I do expect more and more candidates in the future to take the playbook of a certain politician who I won't name, which is just do whatever you want, even if you're required to do certain things, and then just ask for forgiveness later if you think it's more politically expedient to not do that thing. Maybe Andrew Cuomo won't fit that bill, but I do expect that to happen more and more in the future as people see there's really no consequences to not doing what you're supposed to do from a party perspective.
Yeah, well, the fundraising stuff, the campaign finance stuff, and the like management of your campaign, I mean, that there have been consequences lately. He did get docked $600,000 for appearing to coordinate with a PAC that was supporting him. So he got fined essentially for that. And Eric Adams got denied the public matching funds program. So that does give regulators a little bit of leverage, this this use of public funds and allocating those to candidates. But yeah, Cuomo, I think, fits into that mold of someone who is effective partially because they don't accept some of those limitations to get things done. Or that's how he's branded himself a little bit. Yeah. Other things to watch between now and then. I'm curious what's going to happen with Adrienne Adams. I mean, at this point, the race, it doesn't seem to be a lot of uncertainty in the race, given the polls that we've seen recently. But, Zohran Mamdani is very exciting to people. Brad Lander has been working toward this for a really long time. And Adrienne Adams she's got the support of the state attorney general. She has a Public Employees District Council 37 behind her. I just wonder if her ceiling is higher than some people think.
Yeah, I mean, I think the debate's going to be a really interesting inflection point. I didn't realize that Cuomo was obligated to participate, and I think that's going to make for some really compelling TV, because who can prosecute the case against him given the I'm not going to opine on the legitimacy of the skeletons, but there are a number of skeletons in the closet that can be brought out during a debate. The whole debate can just be going through the various allegations that have been levied against Cuomo. So I'm curious to see who will be most effective at doing that. And if it's Iran, it's just intuition. It feels like there might be a path there if he can do that effectively at the debate.
Yeah, I say the debate partially just because of the Joe Biden debate.
Yeah.
That we saw last summer, where, you can either see someone break out. I think Kamala Harris had a really amazing debate. I don't remember if it was
2020
it might
election.
have been 2020, and she was right. She was seen as a star first. You can have these amazing debate moments where you break out, and that's where your campaign changes for the better. But with Biden, we saw that that's where he completely choked, and that was the end of his candidacy. So it could go either way.
Yeah.
And Cuomo, he has a target on his back, obviously. It's hard to be way far ahead for this long and sustain it, because everyone's training their sights on you.
Yeah. And I think to your point, people don't, especially New York City people who are just thinking about what they're doing tomorrow, they're not necessarily thinking about the election quite yet, or the primary. They might make their decision the day of, right? And whatever story is percolating in the news at that time, or whatever Facebook post they read that day, could have more influence than we know. So I guess we'll see. And definitely would love to have you come back on in closer to the general to talk about Curtis Sliwa's hat and other things. If people want to read more of your stuff, see what you're doing on social media, where can they go?
I am at City and State New York, so cityandstateny.com. We also have a very popular newsletter called First Read that you can sign up for. It comes out daily at cityandstatenewyork.com. And I'm on X and Blue Sky as Holly Pret, HOLLYPRET.
This is great. Thank you so much for taking a few minutes, and we'll talk again soon.
Thanks so much for having me.
For more on all things real estate and the law, subscribe to this and our other podcasts. Follow Bergstein, Flynn, Knowlton, and Polina on social media. Subscribe to our newsletter and go to bfklawoffice.com. That's bfklawoffice.com to learn more.